She was just a flower vendor on the corner of Fifth Avenue, selling roses to couples who never saw her face. But when that entitled princess ran me over with her daddy's Ferrari and left me bleeding on the asphalt, everything changed. The most powerful man in Manhattan stepped out of the crowd and said 4 words that shattered everyone's world. "That's my wife dying." What happens when a billionaire's carefully hidden marriage is exposed in the most brutal way possible? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Luna, and for 3 years, I sold flowers on the corner of 5th Avenue and 57th Street in Manhattan. Every morning at 4 a.m., I'd arrive at the wholesale market, carefully selecting the freshest roses, tulips, and peonies. By 6 a.m., I'd be at my spot, arranging bouquets in white plastic buckets, creating small moments of beauty for people who rushed past without ever really seeing me. The corner of 5th and 57th wasn't just any street corner. It was where old money met new technology, where hedge fund managers bought apology roses for wives they'd neglected, where young executives grabbed bouquets for first dates at restaurants they couldn't really afford. I watched their lives unfold in small moments: proposals, breakups, celebrations, apologies, all from my invisible perch on the sidewalk. Most people assumed I was nobody special. Just another immigrant trying to make it in the city, wrapped in layers of worn clothing, my hands permanently stained green from stem cutting, my back aching from standing 14 hours a day. They'd hand me their credit cards without making eye contact, take their flowers without saying thank you, and continue conversations on their phones as if I were nothing more than a vending machine. But I had my reasons for choosing this life, for staying invisible in plain sight. My younger sister Mira was at Columbia Medical School. She was brilliant, the kind of brilliant that comes once in a generation, and she was going to be a neurosurgeon. Our parents had died in a factory fire when she was 15 and I was 22. I'd promised her, that she'd have her chance at the life she deserved. Every rose I sold, every 16-hour day I worked, every moment of invisibility I endured was an investment in her future. That's how I ended up married to Dominic Winters, though the world had no idea he even had a wife. 8 months ago, I'd been setting up my flower stand when a man in a $10,000 suit stopped abruptly, staring at my roses like they held the answer to every question he'd ever asked. He bought every single flower I had that day, nearly $800 worth, and asked me to deliver them to an address in Tribeca. The address turned out to be a hospice facility. The flowers were for his grandmother, Eleanor Winters, the woman who'd raised him after his parents died in a plane crash when he was 7. She was dying, and he'd remembered how she used to grow roses in their garden in the Hamptons, how she taught him that beauty could bloom even in the harshest conditions. I ended up staying with Eleanor for 3 hours that day, arranging the flowers around her room, telling her stories about the different types of roses, about the secret language of flowers that my own grandmother had taught me back in Romania. Dominic had watched from the doorway, something shifting in his expression as his grandmother smiled for the first time in weeks. Eleanor died 2 days later, but not before making a request that would change everything. She wanted Dominic to marry before his 35th birthday, wanted him to find someone who understood that money wasn't everything, someone who could see beauty in simple things. She'd held my hand as she said this, her eyes moving between Dominic and me with a knowing look that made my heart race. The problem was that Dominic's birthday was in 3 weeks, and his entire inheritance, not just money, but the technology empire his family had built over 3 generations, depended on fulfilling his grandmother's last wish. His board of directors was already circling like vultures, ready to force him out if he didn't meet the terms of Eleanor's will. The conversation we had after Eleanor's funeral was surreal. He needed a wife. I needed money for Mira's education and our mounting debts. We could help each other, he said, without complications or false expectations. A business arrangement, nothing more. 1 year of marriage, then a quiet divorce. He'd pay off Mira's student loans, set us up with enough money to start fresh, and I'd help him keep his company. We married in a small ceremony at City Hall. Just us, a judge, and 2 witnesses from the courthouse staff. Dominic had been respectful but distant, treating our arrangement with the same professional detachment he brought to his business deals. We'd agreed I would continue my flower stand, maintaining our separate lives. He lived in his penthouse on the Upper East Side. I kept my studio apartment in Queens. We met once a week for dinner to maintain appearances for his lawyers, but otherwise we were strangers bound by paper and promises. The morning everything changed started like any other. It was early October, and the city had that perfect fall crispness that made everyone walk a little faster, smile a little more. I'd gotten beautiful dahlias from the market, deep burgundies and bright oranges that looked like captured sunsets. By 7 a.m., my corner was a small explosion of autumn color against the gray concrete. That's when I first saw her, Veronica Ashford, though I didn't know her name yet. She emerged from a cherry-red Ferrari that she'd parked illegally at the corner, its engine purring with the distinctive sound of excessive wealth. She was maybe 23, 24, dressed in designer everything from her sunglasses to her shoes. The kind of girl who'd been born on third base and spent her whole life convinced she'd hit a triple. She was screaming into her phone as she walked, something about a party and someone wearing the same dress, and how her entire night had been literally ruined. She wasn't watching where she was going, and her designer heel caught the edge of one of my flower buckets, sending water and roses spilling across the sidewalk. "What the hell?" she shrieked, pulling out her earbuds and glaring at me like I'd personally attacked her. "These are $800 shoes. They're ruined." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I immediately knelt to gather the scattered flowers, my hands working quickly to salvage what I could. "I'm so sorry, miss. Let you what? Let you make it worse?" She stepped back, nearly crushing a fallen rose under her heel. "Do you have any idea who I am? My father owns half the commercial real estate in this city. I could have this entire corner shut down with one phone call." I kept my eyes down, continuing to collect my flowers. I'd learned long ago that with people like this, the best response was no response. Let them exhaust themselves with their own anger, like toddlers having tantrums. "I'll pay for the shoes to be cleaned," I offered quietly, though the thought of what that might cost made my stomach clench. "Cleaned?" She laughed, but it was sharp, cruel. "These are limited edition Louboutins. They don't get cleaned, they get replaced. That's $3,000 you owe me, flower girl." $3,000, more than I made in a good week, more than I had in my savings account. I stood slowly, meeting her eyes for the first time. "I don't have that kind of money." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before putting your trash in the middle of the sidewalk." She pulled out her phone, started recording. This is what happens when they let anyone sell anything anywhere. The city's going to hell because of people like this. A small crowd had started to gather, some people recording with their own phones, others just watching the drama unfold. I recognized a few regular customers, but none of them stepped forward to help. I was on my own as always. "Please," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "These flowers are my livelihood. I'm just trying to make an honest living." "Honest living?" Veronica stepped closer, and I could smell her perfume, something expensive and overwhelming, cluttering up the sidewalk, making the city look like a third-world bazaar. "You want to sell flowers? Get a real job at a real shop." She turned back to her Ferrari, but not before kicking over another bucket of flowers, sending tulips scattering into the street. "Clean this mess up before I call the cops. And you still owe me for the shoes." I watched her walk back to her car, something inside me finally snapping. "You can't just destroy someone's property and drive away," I called after her. She turned, her perfectly contoured face twisted with amusement. "Watch me." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. She got into her Ferrari, revved the engine unnecessarily loud, and started to pull out. But she was looking at her phone, posting her video of our encounter, adding hashtags about keeping the city clean and, quote, "know your place," guiding him out of the room with the practiced efficiency of someone used to controlling every situation. For the next 3 days, I settled into a routine, care for Nathaniel during the day, spent time with Luna in the evenings, and tried to ignore the growing feeling that something wasn't right in the Ashworth house. Vivienne was always polite but cold, watching everything I did with those calculating eyes. The other staff members were friendly but careful, speaking in whispers and glancing around nervously before saying anything that might be construed as gossip. It was the cook, Maria, who first hinted that all was not as it seemed in the Ashworth family. She was a kind woman in her 50s who had worked for the family for over a decade. While preparing Luna's baby food one afternoon, she mentioned casually that she was glad to see someone caring for the children who actually seemed to love what they were doing. The previous nannies, she said with a meaningful look, didn't last very long. They always left suddenly, usually in the middle of the night, without giving proper notice or saying goodbye. When I asked why, Maria just shook her head and muttered something in Spanish that I couldn't understand. But her expression was enough to make my skin crawl. That night I held Luna a little tighter and wondered what I had gotten us into. But $15,000 was $15,000, and I had already endured 3 days. I could handle 4 more, couldn't I? The answer came on Saturday morning in the most terrifying way possible. I woke up to Luna screaming. Not her normal cry, but a sound of pure distress that sent ice through my veins. She was burning with fever, her little body rigid with pain, her eyes rolled back in a way that made my nursing training scream warnings. This wasn't a normal baby illness. This was poisoning. I scooped her up and ran for the main house, shouting for help. Maria met me in the hallway, took one look at Luna, and crossed herself. "Dios mío," she whispered. "What happened to her?" "I don't know," I gasped, my hands shaking as I tried to take Luna's pulse. "She was fine when I put her to bed last night. She needs a hospital now." Jonathan appeared, still in his pajamas, his face going white when he saw Luna's condition. "My car," he said immediately. "I'll drive." But before we could move, Vivienne glided down the stairs, perfectly dressed despite the early hour, her expression showing not concern, but something that looked almost like satisfaction. "What's all this commotion?" she asked, her voice maddeningly calm. "My baby's been poisoned," I said, unable to keep the desperation out of my voice. "She needs emergency care." "Poisoned?" Vivienne raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "That seems rather dramatic. Perhaps she simply ate something that disagreed with her. Children are so delicate, especially when they're not accustomed to quality food." The casual cruelty of her words hit me like a physical blow, but I didn't have time to process it. Luna's breathing was becoming labored, her lips taking on a blue tinge that sent every maternal instinct into overdrive. "Get out of my way!" I snapped, pushing past Vivienne toward the door. "My daughter is dying." Jonathan was already in the car with the engine running, his face grim with an emotion I couldn't identify. As I buckled Luna into the car seat with trembling hands, I caught sight of Vivienne in the rearview mirror. She was standing in the doorway, watching us leave with a small smile on her perfect lips. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that whatever was happening to Luna, Vivienne Ashworth was responsible for it. The hospital was a nightmare blur of emergency rooms, tests, and doctors asking questions I couldn't answer. Yes, Luna had been healthy. No, she hadn't shown any signs of illness. No, I couldn't think of anything she might have ingested that could cause this reaction. But the blood tests told a story that made my knees weak with terror. Luna had been poisoned with something called oleander, a plant toxin that attacked the heart and nervous system. In large enough doses, it was fatal. How is this possible? I asked Dr. Martinez, the pediatric specialist who was overseeing Luna's care. She's 6 months old. She doesn't eat anything but breast milk and the baby food I prepare myself. The doctor's expression was grim. Oleander poisoning in infants usually happens through contaminated food or water. Someone would have had to deliberately introduce the toxin into something she consumed. The word deliberately hit me like a sledgehammer. Someone had tried to murder my baby. I was sitting by Luna's bedside, holding her tiny hand and praying to every deity I could think of. When Jonathan Ashworth appeared in the doorway, he looked like he had aged 10 years since morning, his face gray with exhaustion and something that might have been guilt. "How is she?" he asked quietly. "Fighting for her life," I replied without looking up. "The doctors aren't sure if the antidote will work in time." He was quiet for so long that I finally turned to look at him. There were tears in his eyes, and his hands were shaking. "Elena," he said finally, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you the day you arrived." But before he could continue, Vivienne swept into the room like a toxic cloud, her presence filling the space with tension and barely concealed malice. "Jonathan, darling," she said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey, "you shouldn't be bothering Elena during this difficult time. I'm sure she needs to focus on her daughter's recovery." Her eyes met mine across Luna's hospital bed, And I saw something in them that made my blood run cold. Not guilt, not remorse, but satisfaction. She was enjoying this. She was enjoying watching my baby suffer, watching me fall apart with fear and helplessness. That's when Jonathan did something that shocked us both. He stepped forward, his entire demeanor changing from apologetic to commanding, and when he spoke, his voice carried an authority I hadn't heard before. "Vivienne," he said quietly, "I know what you did. I know about the oleander extract you've been keeping in your private laboratory. I know you put it in the baby food that Elena prepared for Luna yesterday evening." The silence in the room was deafening. Vivienne's perfect mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something vicious and calculating underneath. Then she laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "That's ridiculous, Jonathan. Why would I harm a servant's child? I have nothing to gain from hurting some nobody's baby." But her voice was too controlled, too careful, and I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes as she calculated her next move. "Because," Jonathan continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, "you found out who Elena really is. You discovered the connection between her and our family, and you couldn't stand the thought of sharing what you consider yours." Vivienne's face went white, but she kept her composure. "I have no idea what you're talking about. You're distraught about the child's illness, and you're not thinking clearly." "But I was thinking clearly for the first time in years," Jonathan said. "I was thinking clearly enough to have your laboratory tested this morning. I was thinking clearly enough to call the police and have them run a full investigation. And I was thinking clearly enough to finally tell Elena the truth about why you really hired her, and what you've been trying to hide from me for the past 6 months." My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear over the sound of my own pulse. "What truth?" I whispered, still holding Luna's hand, afraid to hope that somehow this nightmare might make sense. Jonathan looked at me with an expression full of pain, regret, and something that might have been love. "Elena," he said gently, "you're not just some random nurse I hired. You're my daughter. And Vivienne has known it all along." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Daughter." The room spun around me as I tried to process what Jonathan had just said. My entire life, everything I thought I knew about myself, my family, my place in the world, crumbled in an instant. "I'm your what?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the beeping of Luna's heart monitor. Vivienne's carefully constructed facade finally shattered completely, her face contorted with rage and something far more dangerous. "You told her," she hissed at Jonathan. "After everything we agreed, after all the precautions we took, you actually told her. Do you have any idea what this means? What this could cost us?" Jonathan stepped closer to my bedside, his eyes never leaving my face. "Elena, 27 years ago, I had a brief relationship with a young woman named Carmen Vasquez. She was a medical student, brilliant, compassionate, everything that Vivienne pretends to be. When Carmen told me she was pregnant, I wanted to do the right thing. I wanted to become their story, a symbol of every time someone with money had treated them as less than human. But the real surprise came from Dominic's board of directors. These were men and women who'd been prepared to challenge his inheritance, who'd viewed his marriage requirement as a weakness to exploit. But now, seeing the public rally around us, seeing Dominic's fierce protection of me, they understood something that quarterly reports could never show. Their CEO wasn't just a brilliant businessman, he was a man of principle, someone who would fight for what he believed in. The board president, Margaret Chen, visited me in the hospital. She was an elegant woman in her 60s, who'd built her own fortune in biotech. "I owe you an apology," she said, sitting carefully in the visitor's chair. "When Dominic first told us he was married, we assumed it was a sham to meet his grandmother's requirements. We had investigators looking into you, trying to prove the marriage was fraudulent." "And what did you find?" I asked, curious despite myself. She smiled. "We found that you've never used Dominic's credit cards, that you still pay rent on a studio apartment in Queens, that you've been sending 70% of your flower stand earnings to your sister. We found that you're probably the only person in Dominic's life who wants nothing from him except his happiness." "That's not entirely true," I admitted. "Our marriage started as a business arrangement. He helped my sister, I helped him keep his company." "Perhaps," Margaret said. "But anyone watching him these past 3 days would know it's become something much more. I've known Dominic since he was 25, watched him build his empire with cold efficiency. I've never seen him like this, desperate, furious, completely unwilling to compromise. He's liquidating assets to ensure Veronica Ashford faces justice. He's threatened to pull his company's advertising from any media outlet that victim blames you. He's been sleeping in that chair every night because he refuses to leave your side. I looked at Dominic, who dozed off in the uncomfortable hospital chair, his hand still holding mine even in sleep. He looked younger somehow, vulnerable in a way the world never got to see. "He's a good man," I said softly. "He is," Margaret agreed. "But you've made him better. Before you, Dominic was brilliant, but disconnected. He could solve any technical problem, but couldn't see the human element. You've taught him that there's more to life than stock prices and market dominance." Mira arrived from Boston that evening, having taken emergency leave from her residency. She burst into the room like a hurricane, all 5 feet 2 inches of protective sister fury. "I'm going to kill her," she announced, dropping her bag and rushing to my bedside. "That entitled brat is going to need reconstructive surgery when I'm done with her." "Mira, you're training to be a neurosurgeon, not a fighter," I reminded her, though I couldn't help but smile. "I'm Romanian," she said, as if that explained everything. "We protect our own." She turned to Dominic, who'd woken up at her entrance. They'd met a few times at our weekly dinners. But this was different. This was Mira, in full protective mode, evaluating whether this man was worthy of her sister. "You're going to destroy her, right?" she asked him point blank. "Not just arrest her. Not just sue her. I want that woman to understand what it feels like to lose everything." Dominic's smile was sharp, already in progress. "Her father's real estate empire is built on leveraged debt. I've been calling in favors, talking to banks. Within a month, Richard Ashford won't be able to get a loan for a coffee. His daughter's trust fund is tied to his company's value. When that crashes, she'll have nothing." "Good," Mira said, satisfied. Then her expression softened as she looked at me. "Luna, why didn't you tell me you were in love with him?" I felt heat rise to my cheeks. It wasn't supposed to be like that. It was just business. "Business," she scoffed. "I've seen how you look at each other during those dinners. Like you're both starving and the other person is a feast. It was painful to watch you both pretending it meant nothing." The truth of her words hit me harder than Veronica's Ferrari had. All those months of careful distance, of professional boundaries, of pretending that our weekly dinners were just obligation, we'd been fooling ourselves. Every conversation had been charged with something we'd both been too afraid to name. I was scared, I admitted, looking at Dominic. "You're this brilliant billionaire, and I'm just—" "Everything," Dominic interrupted, his voice fierce. "You're everything, Luna. You're the woman who sees beauty where others see nothing. Who works harder than anyone I've ever met. Who brought light to my grandmother's last days and never asked for anything in return. You're the bravest person I know, and I've been a coward for not telling you every single day how extraordinary you are." The next few days brought a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Veronica Ashford was charged with vehicular assault, reckless endangerment, and leaving the scene of an accident. Her bail was set at $2 million, which her father paid immediately, but the damage to their reputation was already spreading like wildfire. Former employees of the Ashford Company started coming forward with stories of abuse and harassment. 3 more victims of Veronica's previous hit-and-runs broke their NDAs to speak publicly about what had happened to them. The Manhattan District Attorney, facing public pressure and armed with overwhelming evidence, announced they would be seeking the maximum sentence. But Dominic wasn't satisfied with just criminal charges. He launched a civil suit that would become legendary in legal circles. He wasn't just suing for my medical bills and lost income. He was suing for the systematic destruction of human dignity. His legal team argued that Veronica Ashford's actions represented a pattern of viewing working-class people as disposable, and that punitive damages should reflect not just the physical harm done to me, but the message that needed to be sent to others who thought wealth placed them above consequence. The number he demanded made headlines around the world: $100 million. "That's insane," Richard Ashford said in a televised interview, his face red with indignation. "She's a flower vendor. Her entire lifetime earnings wouldn't amount to a fraction of that." But Dominic's response, delivered at another press conference, became the rallying cry for workers everywhere. "You're right. Luna's lifetime earnings as a flower vendor wouldn't reach that number." But that's exactly the point. You've just admitted that you see her life as worth less because of her job. You've proven that you and your daughter believe wealth determines human value. This lawsuit isn't about money. It's about establishing once and for all that a flower vendor's life is worth exactly as much as a billionaire's. The support that poured in was overwhelming. A GoFundMe started by strangers to help with my recovery raised $3 million in 48 hours. I tried to refuse it to ask that it be donated to charity, but the organizer, a woman who'd been hit by a drunk driver and left with permanent injuries, insisted I keep it. "This isn't charity," she told me in a video call. "This is solidarity. Every working person who's ever been stepped on, overlooked, or hurt by someone who thought they were untouchable, we're all standing with you." Flower vendors from around the world sent bouquets to my hospital room. The room became a garden. Overflow had to be distributed to other patients and eventually to other hospitals. Each arrangement came with a note of support, stories of their own struggles, their own moments of being invisible in a world that only saw wealth. A week into my recovery, Dominic brought someone unexpected to see me, Veronica Ashford's younger sister, Jennifer. She was nothing like Veronica, quiet, thoughtful, dressed simply despite having access to the same wealth. "I wanted to apologize," she said, barely meeting my eyes. "Not for my sister, her actions are her own. But for all the times I knew she'd hurt someone and didn't speak up. For every time my father made her problems disappear, and I stayed silent because it was easier." "You're not responsible for your sister's actions," I told her. "No," she agreed, "but I'm responsible for my silence. I knew about the delivery driver, the food truck owner. I knew she was getting worse, more reckless, more convinced she was untouchable. I should have done something." She pulled out a folder, thick with documents. "These are records of every incident, every cover-up, every person my father paid to stay quiet. I'm testifying for the prosecution. My family will probably disown me, but I can't watch them destroy another life and pretend I don't see it." The trial became the most watched legal proceeding of the year. Every major news outlet had reporters in the courtroom. The public gallery was packed every day with working-class New Yorkers who came to witness what they hoped would be justice finally served. Veronica appeared in court dressed conservatively, her lawyers clearly having coached her to look sympathetic. But the evidence was overwhelming. The security footage showed her looking at her phone when she hit me. Her Instagram stories from the spa, posted while I was in emergency surgery, showed a complete lack of remorse. The testimony from her previous victims painted a pattern of escalating violence and decreasing concern for consequences. When I took the stand, Dominic's hand never left mine except when I had to walk to the witness box. I told my story simply, without embellishment. How I'd come to America at 15 with nothing. How I'd worked 3 jobs to support Mira's education. How the flower stand had been my pride. My proof that hard work and dignity could build something beautiful. "She didn't just hit me with her car," I said, looking directly at Veronica. "She tried to erase me, to make me nothing, because in her world I was nothing. But I'm not nothing. I'm a sister, a wife, a small business owner, a human being who deserves the same respect as anyone else in this room." Veronica's defense was exactly what we'd expected. Victim blaming, claims of accident, appeals to her youth and potential. Her father testified about what a good person she was, how this was out of character, how destroying her future wouldn't bring justice. But then, Jennifer Ashford took the stand for the prosecution, and her testimony was devastating. She detailed years of Veronica's escalating cruelty, their father's enabling, the culture of consequence-free living that had led to this moment. She produced receipts, recordings, text messages that showed Veronica bragging about her previous hit-and-runs, joking that poor people were worth points, like a video game. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge's sentencing made national news. 10 years in prison, no possibility of early release for the first 5. The maximum allowed under the law. Richard Ashford's empire crumbled within weeks. The banks, pressured by public opinion and Dominic's influence, called in their loans. His investors pulled out. The real estate portfolio that had made him untouchable was liquidated piece by piece. He went from billionaire to bankrupt in less than 2 months, taking Veronica's trust fund with him. But the real victory came in the civil trial. The jury awarded the full $100 million in punitive damages, sending a clear message that wealth was not a shield against justice. Dominic announced immediately that we would be using the money to create a legal fund for hit-and-run victims who couldn't afford proper representation, ensuring that what happened to Veronica's previous victims would never happen again. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.